Tonight, we're doing our first movie review regarding The Iron Claw, the story of the Von Erich family, this time on Falls Count Anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're going a little further outside the ring than I think we normally do. At this particular point in time, we had a piece of pop culture come out recently in the last week or so called The Iron Claw, an aptly named film. It tells the tragic story of the Von Erich family, which is basically wrestling royalty. I guess perhaps best compared to the Kennedys, with many of the tragedies that befell their life. The film, well, let's just give it an overall rating. A, B, C, D, E, or F. How would you rate the film overall?
I would say it was definitely a solid B, maybe even push an A minus.
Yeah,
I thought it was very good.
I thought it was an A minus film. It was 2 hours and 12 minutes, so it didn't really lag. There was an all-star cast, something you might see one or two of these names, but to have this many outstanding actors performing.
And right off the bat, I'll say I've never really been a Zac Efron fan, and I wasn't crazy about him being cast in it, but then seeing the movie, I think the majority of the casting choices for this movie were pretty spot on.
Yeah, he can act.
Yeah.
Of course, we had Zac Efron playing Kevin Von Erich, the second oldest Von Erich brother. Jeremy Allen White, who you may know from, I think it's The Beast, is the popular FX show he's on now. But you'd know his face. He plays Carrie. Harris Dickinson, a relatively unknown actor compared to the others. David Von Erich. Maura Tierney played the mother Doris Von Erich. Holt McCallany, who the name you probably don't know, but he's been in all kinds of stuff. He plays like that old gruff cop is kind of his stereotypical. He's Fritz, the father.
Patriarch.
Yep, sort of the patriarch. And then, of course, there's a couple sneaky. Well, of course, Stanley Simmons, another relatively unknown guy, plays Mike Von Erich. And then, of course, there were some sneaky. We saw Chavo. Mm-hmm. Who I didn't realize this at the time was the Iron Sheik, who was playing the Sheik.
That's what I thought, yeah.
At the time, Ryan Nemeth was Gino Hernandez. Kevin Anton did a really good Harley Race.
Yes.
There was some really good performances, including Michael Harney as Bill Mercer.
And your boy.
And, of course, my boy made a painfully short
Yeah, he said there
appearance.
There were other scenes that ended up getting cut. But MJF, he played the kayfabe cousin Lance Von Erich.
Yep. One of the fake brothers, sort of representing the downfall of sort of Eric, sort of the low point for Kevin in the show. So anyways, brief synopsis. Basically, there's these brothers. They have an overbearing father. They both love being in the wrestling business. And it just kind of tells this tale of this family trying to make it in the business, finding great success, but also finding great tragedy. There are many accidents that befall. I believe it's David that dies in Japan when his intestines basically erupt and he dies in a hotel room.
Before you get into that anymore, there's probably going to be spoilers in this video
Again,
about this movie.
You could read the Wikipedia page and it'd be the same thing.
Yep, David died in Japan from a ruptured intestine.
There were 3 suicides in the family, only 2 of which are actually covered in the film, but lots of injuries, and actually even Kevin, who is the only surviving Von Erich brother, even Kevin experienced his own professional tragedy. And I guess that was one of the overarching themes. Obviously it's a little stereotypical to call the film The Iron Claw. That was Fritz's sort of finishing move way back in the day. But it sort of struck me that there was some really significant meaningfulness behind that, and I think that Zac Efron did a great job of sort of showing this in the film, is there's this sense of doom. There's this sense that this invisible force is sort of holding the family down. And no matter how hard they try and fight, no matter what levels of success that they find, and they do find great levels of success, they're tripping at the finish line. They can't quite get there.
Yeah, they referenced it a lot through the movie, and in real life history, there was definitely a sense of the Von Erich curse.
Yep.
And that was pretty much the whole story of this movie, was this curse kept coming up, like you said, kept holding the family down. they'd get opportunities that get ripped away, or there would be injury, there'd be downfall after downfall after downfall.
Yep.
So definitely that parallel it gets drawn.
And there was this kind of level of irony outside of maybe the youngest brother Chris, who really isn't covered in the movie at all, or David. Kevin sort of finds the least amount of success, and yet he's the one that kind of makes it to the finish line. He's the least injured of all the brothers, and yet the first sort of tragedy befalls him when, due to no fault of his own, he loses the opportunity to win the NWA World Championship, which sort of is the first, by comparison, mini tragedy, but it is the first. And then, of course, his brother David ends up sort of leapfrogging over him and actually winning the championship. And getting to go to Japan. So, it's very interesting how Kevin, who, and this is maybe part of the significance of the story, maybe Kevin, ironically, as the person that's desperately trying, and they make this clear in the film, like he really, more than all his other brothers, he seems to really care about winning the championship.
He wants to be the champion.
He wants to sort of fill Fritz's shoes as the patriarch of the family, and all of these pieces of bad luck that seem to befall him that prevent him from taking that next step and becoming world champion are actually the things that save him in the end, and are ones that actually make him the survivor above all his brothers. So let's just talk very briefly about the brothers, then we'll go into a review, and then just so everybody can keep everything straight, because there's a lot of them. So there is, I guess it would make sense to talk about Kevin, who is the oldest surviving brother. There is a Von Erich brother that was older than him, but he died.
Their real names are Addison, right?
Adkisson.
Right.
Adkisson. Jack is technically the firstborn.
Yep, he died when he was 6.
He died when he was 6.
Freak accident.
There was he stepped on a trailer tongue and was electrically shocked.
Right, and then he actually died by drowning in a puddle.
Fell into a melting snow puddle and drowned.
Yep.
Talk about terrible.
Freak accident.
Yeah, so he was only 6. So ironically, he makes more of an appearance than Chris, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But then there's Kevin, who was a baby basically when his brother died.
I think they were like 2 years apart or something, so like 4, yeah.
He's the one that Zac Efron plays, and he's the one that sort of doesn't really achieve greatness but manages to make it to the end. There's David, who leapfrogs his older brother, and ends up...
he was considered the talker. He was the promo guy, and that kind of is what pushed him ahead of Kevin.
Known as the Yellow Rose of Texas because of his blonde hair.
Yep.
Carrie, who desperately wanted to make the Olympics as a discus thrower for the University of Houston, very successful in athletics. Because of the boycott of the Moscow Olympics in 1980, thank you, Jimmy Carter, Carrie decides to leave discus throwing and join the family business. He probably finds the most mainstream success.
Yep, he was in WWB for a while as the Texas Tornado.
The Texas Tornado. But then eventually ends up ending his own life via shotgun to the chest, I believe. Mike Von Erich, who is sort of the youngest depicted in the story, really tries to make a name for himself as a musician, finds some limited success, which is explored in the story. However, due to a freak accident, needs shoulder surgery, ends up going into toxic shock syndrome, and can really never wrestle after that. He never gains his strength or dexterity afterwards. The way they depicted in the film, they kind of made it seem like he was mentally a little off as well.
I think this was the case in real life too. There was a bit of brain damage. I don't know if it was as severe as they depicted in the film.
Yep.
But he was struggling to teach himself to play guitar again in the movie. So
he slips into a depression, ends up taking a bunch of tranquilizers, and ending his own life, unfortunately. And then, not really shown in the story at all, is Chris Von Erich, the youngest brother, the shortest, the stoutest, the most sickly, really, of all of them. I think he's by far the youngest, actually.
Yeah, he was much younger.
3 or 4 years younger.
But he really wanted to be a wrestler, especially, it was specifically said that he idolized Mike.
Yes.
And, again, in the film, Mike's journey seems extremely short, but in real life he wrestled for about 4 years.
Yes.
Before that injury that happened.
There are some other things that get missed. Some children. Obviously, there's a third generation of Von Erichs that sort of get missed in the story, except for Kevin's children.
Carrie had kids, which weren't in the film.
David has a kid.
David has a kid. Actually, Kevin's kids, they reversed. He had girls before he had boys, but the movie only showed the boys.
Yeah, interesting.
Which is... And I think they were just trying to show the parallel between brothers kind of thing.
And Chris ends up so he deals with
Chris wasn't in the movie at
easily broken bones, asthma, and other medical related issues. He wrestles for a few years, can't find success, and then ends up shooting himself in the head, unfortunately, and ending his own life. So now today, the only second generation member of the Von Erich family that continues to survive is Kevin, and then there are several, obviously David's daughter, Kevin's children, Carrie's children continue to survive to this day. So that is a brief overview of all the brothers. Now I want to point you to a review from Roger Ebert that I will link down below. You can check it out. But I think that what I liked about this particular review is it touched on what I think are the three major critiques of the film, and I think we should address them one by one quickly here. So the first critique is, where the fuck is Chris? This was the first thing that was pointed out by a cohort of ours that happened to be watching the film at the same time. Hey, where the heck is Chris? Chris being much younger, now granted his suicide did come within the timeline of the story.
Before Carrie, yeah.
Why do you think Chris got left out of the film?
Well, I did look into it beforehand, and the director of the film said it basically boiled down to time, keeping the movie shorter.
Yeah, too many stories to tell.
And that he actually tied in Chris's story. He kind of split Chris's story between Mike and Carrie and put elements into both of their storylines in the movie.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with Chris's story, you do see elements in sort of towards the end, you sort of Carrie's sort of unraveling, and then up to the end of his life, you do see a lot of similarities there, and then sort of the way his career progresses.
I'm not sure, I'm not positive on this, but I don't think Mike Von Erich was as... I don't know if this is right, Roy, as fragile as he's depicted in the movie.
They did depict him. Right, you're right. That's more Chris.
So, yeah, I think that's where the Chris aspect comes in.
Chris was pretty fragile. So, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of brothers. There's a lot of tragedy to get to. You can only tell so many stories, I think, given the fact that his age difference was so significant from the rest of his brothers. It chronologically maybe makes sense to leave Chris out. That being said, the movie could have been 20 minutes longer, and I don't think it would have... would have killed, at least for me, it wouldn't have killed it. So I think it's definitely a legitimate critique, especially if you historically understand the Von Erich story. But I don't think any elements of Chris's life are missing. I don't think that it's like, oh, we didn't see some aspect of the tragedy. I think, unfortunately, his tragedy is similar to his brother's, unfortunately. Right. The second critique that I read oftentimes, which is outlined here in this review, is no character development. Now, character development is something that happens in fictional stories because it makes stories really interesting. Right. But this is a historical biopic. It's based on a true story. It's quite historically accurate, actually, if you look at the events and how they were laid out and everything.
Some dates are changed. Some, the timeline is messed around a little bit, but overall, it's pretty accurate. Quite accurate.
More accurate than the Napoleon film that just came out was. That's for sure. I can tell you that. People in the real world don't act the way that fictional characters do, and I think by the way, you see Kevin change significantly.
Yes.
So he goes through massive amounts of character development.
Yeah, he fully believes in that Von Erich curse. Once he starts having kids, he doesn't want them to have the Von Erich name.
Yeah, they get the Atkinson name.
He wants to stay away from them, to keep the curse away from them, to the point where he's sleeping at the arena and not going home to his family. And then by the end of the movie, he has turned and
Yep.
and realize that his family is the important thing. So there's definitely a character arc for him, without a doubt.
Also, one of the more subtle roles in the film is Maura Tierney's depiction of Doris von Erich. This sort of strong matriarchal, and you can see her starting to crack, especially after Carrie's death. There's a very moving scene in which she's attempting to get dressed for her son's funeral, and she just can't do it. That shows some character development too. Now you do see very little character development from Fritz von Erich, which is the way he was. I mean, that's the thing. Like a lot of in character development comes in subtle forms as well. The negative character arc that we see with like Carrie and David, that is character development. When David goes under the knife and then can't wrestle again and then gets depressed, that's his character developing. Yes, he's not overcoming some massive obstacle, but his character is changing. He's becoming a fundamentally different person. And the same thing with Carrie, him not being able to handle fame very well, and his drug abuse and the way that he dealt with losing the opportunity to go to the Olympics, and the dynamic between David and Kevin after David ends up leapfrogging Kevin, due to some silly mistake that he makes with Ric Flair. That's all character development. It's subtle, it's different, it's there. It's not some massively changing positive change arc, but it's there, it's present. So I think it's really invalid, and I think it's a testament to good writing when you can do it in subtle ways.
The one thing I felt with the film is that the timeline was shortened so much, and things were happening right after another. That you could mistake that as no development, when it's just they have to get a lot in a short amount of time.
And this is the last sort of critique, and it's sort of linked to the second critique on character development. And I'm going to read a direct quote from this particular review, which was written by Christy Lemire. Gave it 2.5 stars, by the way, which I think is a painful underrating. Where is it here? Here it is, quote, "It's all just so sad, or at least it should be so sad, but we rarely feel a legitimate human connection between these brothers," close quote. Does that sound anything like, did she even go to the same movie that we went to?
The bond between the brothers is evident. I mean, they supported each other even after their father gave them a tongue lashing. They were there for each other. They encouraged each other. They congratulated each other. There is a brotherly affection there.
What
for sure.
An incredible... I can't use any other word besides stupid to describe that statement. There is drama and family dynamics when the scene when David leapfrogs Kevin, the drama and the intricacies of that interaction. I mean, anytime any brother looks like they're gonna start to find success that the other ones don't have, there's this palpable sense of there's this bittersweetness to it, where you're really happy for Carrie that he just got signed with the WWF, but you're also really sad for Kevin. Even when he sells the business to Jerry Jarrett at the end of the film, there's a bitter sweetness to it of, I'm escaping this curse, but look at this incredible thing we've done.
At David's funeral, when Fritz is trying to decide who's going to get David's championship match.
Yeah, they're sitting down there, and they're talking on the porch, and there's this awkwardness to it, like you're almost like splitting up his ashes or something like that. And that's a sign of
David's funeral or Michael's funeral, one or the other. I can't remember.
It was David's funeral because David was supposed to defend the title.
Okay.
And then at the very end, when they depict Carrie's suicide, and you see Kevin actually physically attack and almost kill his father because his father didn't take care of his brother, and he didn't do it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you didn't care, but there was plenty of work that was done throughout the entire. And then obviously the depiction that is also kind of referenced in here is this depiction of the brothers meeting again in the afterlife, which was very pleasant. But yes, it's a little supernatural. It was definitely out of place in the film, but sort of represents the depiction. I think it's the way that I read it, because of how it's handled in the film, is it's Kevin sort of making peace with what's happened. It's
his brothers are all together now.
The way I read it was Kevin's imagining his brother, meeting up with his other brothers. This is Carrie in the film, meeting up with his other brothers, including Jack Jr., who who Carrie I don't think ever met because
Nope.
he wasn't
Yeah,
alive
none of the others were born.
when Jack was alive. So I think that those three critiques are completely bogus. This is at least a 4 out of 5, maybe 4.5 out of 5 star film. Areas of
agree.
improvement, I think telling Chris's story would have definitely improved it. It would have been worth the 15 to 20 minutes it would have taken. I think while I definitely know why they made some of the casting decisions they did, I can't help but think they could have done better with Ric Flair.
Yeah, that was going to be my first thing.
Especially given that he played such a larger role than anybody else did, is outside of the family in the role. I think the attitude was there, the excitement was there, but the voice was off.
Yeah, and
the look was a
the
little
look
off.
was off, definitely.
The look was a little off. This was clearly a method acting type casting.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be my first critique, was the Ric Flair casting. But the main thing I was thinking through the movie was it focused so much on the tragedy aspect. I think they could have spent a little bit of time explaining why this family is so important to wrestling, why this movie is being made in the first place. These guys, the Von Erich family, was huge, especially in Texas, but in the wrestling industry as a whole. They were massive icons. Fans loved them. I mean, their feud with the Freebirds was...
Which they touch on briefly.
Very briefly. They could have done better on that, I think. But, I mean, that feud with the Freebirds is iconic. It's one of the most recognizable wrestling feuds of all time.
Yeah.
So, definitely, I mean, I know the whole movie was about the tragedy of the Von Erichs, but definitely focusing a bit more on the good of the Von Erichs and why they are such a famous family in wrestling.
One thing I can say, too, as well, is this was a wrestling film for wrestlers.
Yes.
This was clearly not a film made for the general population. This was not some over-sensationalized biopic. This seemed like a much more, again, I would compare it to Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler from 2008, where there's a lot of inside baseball, there's a lot of pulling the curtain back, while also telling this very specific, very tragic story about this specific people. In the case of The Wrestler, it's a fictional story, and in this one, it's more of a biopic, but lots of references in there that if you don't know about the business, you're not going to get them. You might get Ric Flair, but you're certainly probably not going to understand that Chavo Guerrero plays the Sheik, or you're not going to get a lot of the other references that are associated with it. You certainly aren't going to know who Fritz von Erich is, or what the Iron Claw is, or any of that stuff. And so I hope that the movie does very well. I haven't seen what the current box office receipts are for it. Actually, let me look it up really quick and see if the numbers have been released yet.
Because it just opened last weekend, right?
It did. It's been open for less than a week now.
Christmas weekend it opened.
Yeah, against not a whole heck of a lot of competition. I think the other film came out was that cartoon from Illumination about the ducks or something like that.
Yeah.
It's the only one that came out. But yeah, it looks like critically it got some decent feedback, but so far it hasn't done terribly well at the box office. Maybe $10 million so far, although I have no idea what it actually grossed. But very high scores, 93% audience score and an 87% rating with the critics on Rotten Tomatoes. So really well. I think Efron could be in Oscar talks as a result of his performance here.
That would be a surprise.
In my opinion. Yeah, it only made, looks like $2.5 million on its opening day against a estimated $20 million budget. So right now it's sitting at about $8 million versus 20. So it'll probably just about break even, would be my guess. But this is definitely a wrestler's movie, which I appreciate, and I hope to God it makes enough money to justify doing something else, because we need to see more programming like this. Dark Side of the Ring, this kind of stuff, I think is very interesting. Not the over-sensationalized, produced A&E stuff that WWE is doing. That has a place, but it's a very different place from where we are with this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd like to see more of that kind of stuff.
Agreed.
So go and watch the movie. If you do, please comment down below. Let us know what you thought of it. And here's another interesting question. Who should they make the next movie about? Who would be the next interesting story? Obviously, if you want to make money, you're going to do it over like Hulk Hogan or something like that. You're gonna try
They
and
were
get him
supposed to
on
do
board.
that at Netflix. Chris Hemsworth was supposed to play Hogan.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'd love to hear his Hogan impression. That'd be very funny. But I think doing something Andre the Giant. I mean, his story is very interesting as well. And it would be nice to have Andre the Giant. Wouldn't be a good example, but it'd be nice to have maybe a story of triumph, because it seems like a lot of these stories are a little more tragic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's
A lot
the
of
nature.
tragedy in the wrestling business.
Yeah, that's the nature of the business. So let us know down below what you think, who should be next. And in the meantime, you keep watching, and we'll keep wrestling with the business. Happy New Year.